this cat, man. I'm looking at you. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Today, I'm going to be going over a book that I'm reading. So it usually takes me about a week to burn through a book, and what I mean by that is actually understanding it and grasping the concepts thereof. The last book that took me longer than that was Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning. That thing is just a bear of information, and you got to keep a lot in your head as you go through it. It's on par with reading Nietzsche, but not quite. Nietzsche's a little bit different. They'll assume you've read and know a lot of other things already and can keep a whole bunch of stuff in your head as you keep going. So a lot of times you're here and then you turn back. So I'm reading a book right now called Understanding End Time Prophecies by Paul N. Benware. I'm reading this with the C.S. Lewis Institute. I'm part of their Inklings program. So we basically read a book. There's like 15, 20, 30 of us. Read a book once a month, memorize a couple Bible verses, and then we have a long, lengthy discussion after listening to a lecture. It's really a great, empowering experience, and a lot of it has to do with apologetics, but more in the internal sense. So if you don't know what apologetics are, basically it comes from 1 Peter 3:15. It comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to give an answer to. So you give an answer to why you believe certain things. So I can have a proper apologetic against a Muslim when he doubts the credibility of like the New Testament, that kind of thing. But apologetics only works this way, as far as I can tell. It doesn't work this way. You can't argue people into the kingdom. Words don't work like that. They could, I guess, but if you can argue them into it, someone else can argue them out of it. So it's more of an internal change. This helps you be stronger based on what you already know. And it helps you get thicker skin, and it helps you come up with answers to problems you might not even know you might have in the future, like that kind of thing. So this book here particularly is about understanding the end times. To be honest, this one really doesn't interest me a whole lot. The reason why it doesn't interest me a whole lot is because, well, the same reason Benjamin Franklin was kind of turned off the churches. A lot of the churches weren't focused on Christ and his words for the now. They would always, in Ben Franklin's situation, they would always be pointing to other churches saying, this is why we're not like them. Well, that doesn't help anybody. How about we work on our personal growth? This book here specifically is talking about the end time prophecies. So that's understanding the times that will come. So if you see it coming, if you know it's going to happen, what are you doing right now to prepare for it? But it's all about the vision of the future. And this is a scholarly approach. So I can understand that and respect it. It's like every single version of the end times based on Revelation and Isaiah and Daniel has great insight to what people think it might look like for whatever that's worth. And to me, that could happen tomorrow, or that can happen in 1,000 years from now. It doesn't matter. So I try to focus on how Christ tells me to live right now, because people are lost. Even I am lost, and I still need a guiding light. Every single person does. So perhaps I can help you if you're listening to this, and help somebody else find that. You know, it's the one beggar telling another beggar how to find bread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to point out some of the highlights that called to me, and they're less about the future end time prophecies. Jesus describes himself as coming, I think it's Maranatha. I might be getting that word wrong, but it's imminent. When Christ comes, there will be no sign that he is coming. He'll just come, and then all this stuff will happen. So, and it's very specific. Paul talks about that a lot. So this book is about 400 pages, and that's a good bit. There's a lot of theory crafting that goes on, and you can say it's beyond theory crafting based on evidence, on the past interpretations of dreams and future comings and prophecies. But it starts out here. I actually notated something on the first, page 13, but it's roughly the first part. It's the introduction. It says, after decades of such proclamations through sermons and writings, many believers have become apathetic about the prophecies of the Bible. The attitude exists among many of God's people that when Jesus and the end times come, they will come. But in the meantime, I have to live my life in the real world. Such an attitude is wrong because Bible prophecy is for living in the real world right now. The scriptures testify to the critical importance of the doctrine of future things. For example, John prefaced the Revelation with encouragement that a person who knows prophetic truths and orders his life according to those truths will live better now. So I can understand that. But still, the end will come, regardless of what that looks like. And even, John from Revelation was taken outside of time to see all this stuff. You can't do that. You could try, but describing an event outside of time to people who live in time, it's like describing a third dimension to creatures that only live in two dimensions. Like, how do you do that? It's like complex math no one can understand. But it was like almost a self-contradictory thing. Knowing the future is good because it's for right now. Like, I don't know. It's really weird to me. I'm not trying to refute the book. The premise of that is just knowing the details about the future demise, millennialism, that kind of thing. It seems beyond me. Like, it's so far out of my control. Regardless of what I think that looks like, it'll be gifted to me or handed to me by God if it does come, when it comes, in whatever specific manner He will dictate. That's kind of how I look at it. There is something in here that is a recurring theme that I think is quite interesting. It's the idea of judgment. So one of the points they make in this book is when Christ judges people, it'll be judging based on merits, not in the negative. So you want to have things taken away from you. Rather, if you're good with your gifts right now, you will be blessed in the future. And I think that kind of echoes in the reality we live at the moment. And I can see this with my kids. If I teach them well, and it's a hard teaching, getting my kids to clean stuff up after themselves, they resist. But if I teach that to them, that will get passed on into the future because they will see the difference between, cleaning up and not cleaning up, proper hygienics. Or maybe they won't, maybe they'll fail at that. But it says in your present blessing, usefulness and service, and future reward depend on obedience. So that's listening to the words that Christ would say, per se, or the commands in Deuteronomy. But the final compilation of our salvation does not. So we aim in the same direction. Some aim harder than others willfully, or you just relax, and usually that's letting, like the torrent of life kind of take you over the waterfall. Or you can choose to, swim and paddle against it. We will be saved regardless, but depending upon what we do with the gifts that are given to us, which is the biggest accountability marker that I can see in all of history, God judges you based on what you have or what you know, not based on the highest ideal that mankind in a materialistic wealth sense can present to you, but in something you can actually strive for based on your level of competence. I do think one of the interesting things that's pointed out here is the idea of the messianic rule, when all the kingdoms of men must be basically abolished, must be kind of destroyed and overturned, and probably by our own hand. That's absolute anarchy. And in this current structured world that we see right now, that's almost impossible to fathom. So what would it take to just obliterate all the kingdoms of men, all the governmental factions? Well, if you read the book of Revelation, it would take like all those curses, basically, and they might even be brought on by our own hand, and because there's not that big of a difference between, incompetence, not focusing on the right things, and annihilation of your people. And this is very much one of the Soviet Union's lessons, where they lied about how much food they had, and so like 60 million of their people starved to death. Maybe not that many starved to death, but 60 million died, and a vast majority were entire towns starving because they promised food, and that was because of incompetence and trying to base truth on a lie. So that's an example of how it can be brought on by our own hand. And if we do that enough to the point where we feel that lies and power manipulation are the way forward, we ultimately are going to devalue our own personhood to the point where we are just drowning in every single element that would bring about the destruction of life. It does bring up the reoccurring first and second hero story, the first one being Adam, and the second one being Christ. The first hero is the one that wins with the sword, and you could say that Adam was the one that, by his works, he will live. Because he needs to, and literally live in a materialistic sense, not eternal salvation, but you need to tend to the garden, you need to tend to earth by the sweat of your brow. Because you work, because you wield plow, sword, doesn't matter. Because you do that, you will live. And then Christ comes later to reunite everything, and he's the one that opens the people's eyes to how things should be. It does bring up some very key points as far as scripture goes, like since the loss of Eden, this craving for paradise has resided in the hearts of mankind. I would say that's not for every bit of mankind on the planet, although that is very important to mention. If you have a creation story, even one that goes obviously beyond your own personhood, but the creation of everything, that's what you want to aim for as well, but you need some sort of a vision or a template to even know what to aim for. Societies without creation stories have a terrible time because they don't even know what they're trying to build. They don't even know what was good before, even in myth. That could be a huge problem because you don't even know how to abstractly think about what paradise could be. You just kind of carve it out of stone until maybe that's beautiful. I'm not sure. I don't have anything to compare beauty to. One thing this book does hint on quite a lot is the idea of covenant, specifically with the Jewish people. Now, why is that important? because God's word is important, as he uses word to describe himself in the book of John. A friend of mine wanted to ask me, why Israel? Why not, the Chinese? Why not the Africans? And the answer to that I gave him, I don't have a direct answer for that, as only God can answer the questions that are posited to him, I guess. But why'd you marry your wife? Why not every other girl? Why not another girl? You just chose her specifically, and the idea is intimate relationship. And Israel means to struggle with God. So if you're in a relationship with God, you're going to struggle with him. I'm in a relationship with my kids. They push back. My wife, she is not 100% agreeable with everything I do. We have a relationship, and sometimes one person thinks they're unequally yoked, and so we go back and forth a little bit, but it's not to the point where we're going to destroy the relationship, because the relationship is what we're subjecting ourselves to. Regardless of these struggles we have, we still aim at a relationship, so we're going to rectify, we're going to heal it if we have any tension, which happens in the seasons of life. So the covenant that God promised is that Israel will have a place, and his people will be chosen, and they will be held sacred. So that's something to really keep in mind. Those that bless Israel will be blessed, and those that curse Israel will be cursed. There's certain ramifications that come along with dealing with the Jews specifically in reality. At least I think so. It does bring one point up here. It says the issue of an improving world. The idea that the world is getting better and better does not at all seem to be in line with reality. The evidence points rather to a world that is growing more and more wicked. Technological and scientific advancements have little to do with spiritual and moral progress. It is difficult to see how the facts of current history point to a world that is becoming more righteous and submissive to the law of God. The reality of evil in this world forces post-millennialists to constantly look ahead to the distant future for a golden age. It has been 2,000 years since the first advent of Christ, and still no clear evidence for the arrival of a golden age. So, I say yes and no to this. Obviously, the more you have your needs met, the less you think you have a need of a moral guide. It's like detaching yourself from the ground floor of the Tower of Babel. Detaching yourself from morality itself, because all your needs are met. Why do you have to act well? Everything's gifted to you anyway. It's like the outworking of a spoiled child. And we see this in children, and sure, maybe it's meant for them before they know better, but as we age and become adults, we should know better. So in that kind of sense, you could see maybe instead of the world getting more and more wicked, rather there's a disconnect between the older age teaching the younger age how to properly respect things, like a distance in communication. Because you can be taught how to value what you have, but you need to be taught it. And if you have things like, divorce rates skyrocketing, the family itself being disintegrated, well, those are problems. And how is teaching being done? You think the government's going to teach children how to do that? They're worried more about gender ideology and racism issues in the past, or maybe in the present, I don't know. Safe spaces. It seems like the teaching of moral values is becoming more and more distant. So that could be wickedness, that could be chaos, because then everybody judges based on what's right in their own eyes, obviously. So that is one way you can strengthen reality, I guess, and that from a conscious perspective, which is what you and I share. Make sure you're teaching to the youth and having relationships with them. And I'm not talking about just saying hi, but involving yourself in culture, even beyond maybe your direct family. That's why church community and stuff like that's so important. Involve yourself in other people's lives, or put yourself into the planet to the point where you can make a difference and teach people. Teaching is such an undermined asset of society, especially when we can reverse mind read with our language. Sometimes they hit on real gems, or this person hits on real gems, and you're like, any view of the kingdom that rests in a large measure on a single text should be viewed with suspicion. And I think that's very true. Anything that does not synergize with everything else, or it's like not hinted at through other themes, you got to be skeptical on that. That's like modern cults, like Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons. Really? Charles Taze Russell found the truth, and then Jesus Christ came back in 1910, and no one else figured this out. That's Jehovah's Witnesses. Really? John Smith figured out that Christ came over to North America, and there were giant kingdoms and civilizations over here with compasses and elephants and camels and all that. Really? John Smith figured that out, and no one else in all of history. It's the same kind of thing. Like you gotta look at the, not only just in scripture, but in just the evidence in reality. If there's a huge outage in one specific area that should be there, well, that's like a vacuum. I mean, that could destroy everything. It even says in here, it touches a little bit on, the whole the precept of this direction of our spiritual thought. It says, it was not until the last century that the field of eschatology became a matter to which the mind of the church was turned. Eschatology is literally what happens at the end times. It does go over quite a few times that Christ's coming is imminent, and that we should run the good race so that when judgment comes, we should be given bounty based on how we used our talents. That's running the good race. But before the past 100 years, it's like this seems to be like, I don't want to use the phrase luxury of the affluent, but I still can't get away from the idea that this is low on the tier list of things to worry about as far as spiritual matters are concerned, the things that make up a person. Perhaps it's something to be grasped or try to grasp at. If the symbols we use in our lives and our stories can't resonate on you in reality, like Job obviously knew what righteousness was. Job, out of all people, could definitely understand that because he was tested. If he wasn't tested, how much would his righteousness really be worth? He was constantly blessed by God and not tested. His metal wasn't tempered. He wasn't put to the flames to see if he would melt. That kind of thing. So maybe that's one of the reasons why we reach so far into the future. We reach for interpretation because we need something abstract to aim for. Because we don't have like the cold reality reaching at us because our basic needs are not met. Something like that. He does go over some other key points that are essential, and he doesn't miss the mark. Death, therefore, is the loss of well-being, not the cessation of being itself. I think that's key. It gives you fuel. Well, the whole scriptures leads to that statement roughly. It gives you fuel to aim beyond. That's hope, even though you know death is coming. You know what you have to aim for beyond that. All the terms that are used for death dealing with Christians in the Bible are like non-frightening terms, like sleep. So that's where I am with this book so far. I'm on page 356 of 372. So I'm so close, and for my own benefit, there's actually a definition chart in the back here, which is extremely helpful. Let me not lose my bookmark spot. So all in all, this I think comes to a point of personal interest. Does this interest you? If so, I think this book is really good because it tells you every perspective about the end times that's been in Christian thought. Me personally, I invest myself in how to help me live right now going forward, like even my physical workout, martial arts, my apologetics format, my philosophy, the way I teach my kids, assuming they will be here when I am gone, that kind of deal. You have to live in the now, but it's like in the eternal now, sort of. You know what's coming, and you know that eternity lies beyond, but you have a life to live right now. So the problem, I think, comes when you invest too much of yourself into just looking at the signs that you think are coming and pointing to them as if that's going to convince somebody else that they should turn or burn, to quote Charles Spurgeon. So anyway, that's what I'm reading today. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, click the like button, subscribe to see more in the future, and I'll see you next time. Take care.